Hello class, Professor Quigley here again, and we are going to knock out 7.7 together. In this, we're going to do some more user-defined functions. However, in this problem, you are creating a function that if you pass it in two values, the function is going to pass back to you in return the value that was highest. So here we're given an example. If the inputs that are given to the function is 5 and 7, the function should return 7. If the inputs are -8 and -2, the function returns -8. And then very important thing here, which makes this a little different. It says the function does not just return the largest value, which for -8 and -2 would be -2. Though not necessarily, you may use the absolute value built-in math function called absolute value. So I kind of don't like the way Zybooks has this worded, and I'm going to request that we get this problem kind of cleaned up a little bit and maybe word this a little different, because it requires you to actually know how to use an absolute value. And I've searched in Zybooks and I don't see that function there. So I don't think it's fair that you guys are expected to know how to call a function when you don't know how many parameters and what type of data types you're supposed to pass in and stuff like that. But anyways, let's get started, and what we'll do is we'll walk through this together, looking at our pseudocode over here. So based on the last problem, you shouldn't have a problem understanding how to declare a function, given it a name, declaring what values and data types that you need to accept, and what it is that you're going to return to the user who is calling that. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to follow along with this pseudocode here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to backspace everything, because when you have functions, Zybooks will error out if you don't have that comment within your function. So it just gets kind of confusing, so I'm just going to ignore it altogether. All right, so first things first, function, right? We're telling it we're going to create a function. What is the name? We're going to do exactly like the instructions say up there. In fact, I'm going to be lazy. Double click, copy, double click, paste. Now do my backspace because my parentheses need to start right after the name there. So unlike the last problem, this one, what makes this different is we're going to pass in two variables. So we're going to pass in an integer. We'll do integer x, and we'll do integer y. Close those parentheses, and now we have to declare what it is that this function is going to return. So we'll do returns. It's going to return an integer, and we're going to make that integer called largest value. All right. Now, let me zoom out here for those of you who are, we'll just keep it like that. Okay, so function max magnitude. It's going to accept an integer called x and an integer called y. And again, when you're passing this in, you don't have to have the same variables. You just have to know that, like, I need the first integer and I need the second integer with a comma separated them. And what we're going to get in return when we call this function is we're going to get an integer back, which is called largest value. All right, so what do we want this function to do? We want this function, let me count that. So 1, 2, 3 spaces. We want this function to basically determine if x is larger than y. So I'm going to go ahead and write an if statement, because you could put an if statement inside of a function. You could put any code you want inside of a function. You could put a function inside of a function, but that's a little too advanced. We're not going to do that right now. All we're going to do is an if statement where we're going to say if x is greater than y, and since I want to execute lines only if that if statement equates to true, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, largest value equals x. Seems simple, right? Largest value is an integer that we declared, so we don't have to declare it here because largest value is what's going to get returned. So all we're going to say in this function is if x, which is the first value they passed in, if x is greater than y, then the largest value equals x. That would be the value that's getting passed back in. So let's go ahead and, that's getting passed back out. So let's set that value that's getting passed back out to x. So 1, Now we're going to do the else. So obviously, if x is not greater than y, then we could say largest value equals y. And that's it. I know if we're following along, there's going to be an error here, but I'm going to show you this at the end of the video. So that's the first function there. Now our next function is going to be our function main, and we talked about this in the previous video. Main is basically the name of the function that we want the program to start off in. So the function often returns nothing here because that's just the program. It's just not really returning anything because you don't call main. There's nothing that's calling main, so it will always return nothing. So inside of here, this is where we're going to write that code. So we're going to declare an integer, and we're going to, let's just call this first number. Then we're going to make integer second number. I always spell integer wrong. So integer, oh, can't have spaces in my variables. That is a rule. The application will mess up. That's why we learned that week 1. So we have integer first number, integer second number. Now we're going to say first number equals get next input. Then we'll say second number equals get next input. Now what we want to do is put to output. What is it that we want to put to output? Well, here's where we would put x or y, but now we're not really sure which one to use. So this is where our function is going to come in handy. So what we're going to do, what we want to do is put the function here. So I'm going to take max magnitude. So I'm going to put that function. However, that function, we don't want it to return the code of the function. We want it to actually return the largest value. So in order to do that, if we read this function line here, we can see that a function has to have an integer passed in. In fact, it needs 2 of them. Most of the times, if it's the same data type twice, you're looking at the name to specify, like, okay, x needs to be this one, y needs to be that one. So I'm going to say max magnitude. In parentheses, I need to pass in the first number, comma, space, second number. That should be it. So the first number, long as it's declared as an integer, which it is here, so put max magnitude. So first number will go into the first spot here. Here we call it first number, here we call it x. It really doesn't matter. What matters is the order that we put them in. So if I put the second number first, then that means the second number will actually be x. I know it's kind of confusing. Just know that, like, the first, think of like the arrays and how arrays have an index of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first one here is going to be passed in for the first one here. Second one is going to be passed in for the second one here. And this function is going to return the largest value variable that we declared up here in that, what we call the function signature line. Alright, so let's check this. I know it's going to error, but I figured this is what you guys might have done, and this is why I'm really not really happy with the way Zybooks words this for you, because if you notice, when it put in 2 positive numbers, it was great. It told us that like 7 was the biggest one. However, when we pass in negative numbers, it did the if statement and it knew that 2 is greater than 8. However, when you read the instructions to this problem, it doesn't really want the greatest number. It wants us to output whichever, let's see, which one has the largest absolute value. So absolute value basically means you're taking away the negative sign. So you could do this math yourself without knowing the absolute value, but I don't think it's fair that it's telling you just to use it. So what you do here is in your if statement on line 2, so I'm going to click next. All we're doing is on the if statement, we're going to say, we're going to call a function. So it's actually kind of funny. I started off by saying we're not going to call a function within a function, but actually this is what we're doing. So we're going to say if absolute value, and then I'm going to put that x in the parentheses is greater than, oops, I have to spell absolute right. The V and the B are real close together on the keyboard, so I'll just blame it on that. If A, B, S, O, L, U, if absolute value, then in parentheses, I'm going to pass in Y. Now I'm saying if the absolute value of X is greater than the absolute value of Y, this will work. The reason why I don't like this problem in Zybooks is because absolute value is a function, but you didn't really have to declare it anywhere. Normally, if this was a real application over here, you would have a function that was called absolute value, and it would take an integer, and then down here you would have all those lines of code that will return the absolute value of what you put in. So kind of don't like how Zybooks just assumes that you know that, and plus how you can't see it, but just know that this is a user-defined function. So remember the name of this problem up here is called user-defined functions. So we created two functions that we as a user defined, which is the main and this one. However, these are non-user defined functions, which basically means they're already built into Zybooks. So if I were to say if, rather than saying X is greater than Y, I'm going to say whatever absolute value I get by passing in X. So that function, if you can imagine somewhere that there's a function defined just like what we have here that's going to return the absolute value. So we're going to say if the result of this function is greater than the result of this function, and I just noticed I spelled that wrong. See, this is why I always like to copy and paste. Boom. Okay, so that should work. So I'm going to hit check, and boom, we are good to go. So if that doesn't make sense, please get with me and let me know which line number it was that you got hung up or which error that you're getting, and we will solve that together. But for now, take care, and I will see you on the next problem.